Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to Conversations on Care, our Facebook talk show, bringing together our healthcare partners, our clients and their families, and their caregivers. We're all here to talk about topics to help families better understand and cope with aging parents and family members with chronic care needs. My name is Julie Collada, and I am the founder and president of Open Arms Solutions. Open Arms is a home care agency serving the Chicagoland area, focused on inspired home care solutions for seniors with chronic conditions such as dementia, Parkinson's, and other movement disorders. It is truly our mission to help families through this journey and to know that their loved one is living their best life possible. If you find these dialogues and programs helpful, please give us a like and share so that we can reach more people who really would benefit from this information. If you have a question or a topic that you'd like to learn more about it, write them in the comments and we'll do our best to get them in a future program. Well, with me today is Dr. Jeremy Miselbrook. And I have been so looking forward to this program. Jeremy, I have some friends and many clients who are been looking forward to this program. It's such an important topic. And Jeremy is Dr. Jeremy Misselbrook is a PhD and a professor and educator and nationally board certified chaplain with training in specialties such as mindfulness-based stress reduction and grief support. He currently serves as the manager of spiritual care and music therapy in the North and Northwest regions of Northwestern Medicine in Illinois. And thank you so much, Jeremy, for taking time for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the invite, Julie. It's really a privilege and an honor to be here today.
Thank you so much. So, our topic today, we've never done anything like this on the program in the almost 2 years that we've been doing this program. It's hard to believe that. And I want to thank our own team for suggesting this really important topic. Tell us about your background and what was your journey and what set you on your path to become a chaplain and do this work?
Well, thank you for that great question. I have, it's like all of us. I have a varied experience, and lots of different experiences bring us to the point where we are. To summarize it quite quickly, I was brought to this profession, I believe, because I have an innate connection with people. I feel connected with people in their stories, and I love stories. And as I was looking at my own story, I could just see that I had a strong connection with my family. And then as that connection developed, and I was, exposed to other people in the world through public broadcasting, through just the community in which I grew up, I found that I was instilled with this sense of service, for this sense of doing what I could to help the people around me as I continued to develop as a person. I had strong leaders in my family. They weren't really big about, making a big fuss over themselves, but they had a lot of character, and they showed me what it meant to serve your community and have that sense of servitude and service. And then I was also exposed to mentors, and had mentors in my life who brought me up to use the skills that I had been given, which included, among other things, the connection with people, sure, but also the ability to form those connections with people that I didn't know. And so that was just developed over time. And long story short, my professional pursuits and my academic pursuits converged and led me to being a professional chaplain, where I do that work every day. I connect with people that I know. I connect with people that I'm meeting for the first time in any various life situations, including grief, and just form an opportunity to make that connection stronger, help people to have resources that they might not otherwise be aware of. And it also is a very fulfilling aspect of my life. I have, a fantastic supportive team, and just loving what I'm doing.
Well, you do amazing work. You and I talked a little bit about this before we went on air, and I told you about my experience with people at a hospice team that, amazing how their warmth, their generosity, and their resources just help me and my family get through an amazingly challenging time. And when you experience that, and it sounds like you've had mentors, wonderful mentors in your life, and when you experience how they can affect people, it's incredibly motivating to want to be part of that, to be able to deliver that. So it sounds like that was your experience.
Indeed it was. And specifically on the topic of grief and loss, we know that this can be experienced with many aspects of life. And anytime we lose anything that's important, or anyone who's important or familiar to us, we tend to experience a lot of different emotions associated with that. And, for the purpose of our interview today, I know that a lot of the context of the comments that I will be sharing are around the context of grief associated with death, although this is something that can be applied in many forms of loss in our lives. But like many, my first experience with real grief and loss was the loss of family. And so, as I mentioned, I've worked for many years, over 30 years, in various capacities with people as a minister, as an educator, and as a chaplain. And this is something that we all experience at some point in life. And what we do with those experiences, how we let those experiences into our lives and shape us, and then how we in turn communicate and help as we can the world around us and contribute to our community. That's a big part of what it means to be human, to connect with ourselves and with each other, and share these common experiences and do some good for each other.
Yeah, that's very well said. And the longer you live, the more you experience grief in all sorts of different ways, and loss.
Mm.
And so I will say that I'm really, I know some of the things that we're going to talk about this morning, and I know that I'm really, really interested to discuss some of these things. So let's start off with just a very general question, but I think really important. And what can you tell us about what to expect when experiencing grief? What does that feel look like? What share that with us, please?
That's a great question. What we should really expect is to have an experience that, while it may connect thematically with what other people have experienced, it's still an experience that is unique and particular to us. In 1969, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote a very important work on death and dying, and sometime later also worked on a collaboration on grief and grieving with David Kessler. And in her original work, she set out to define specific stages of grief, and I'm sure many people might be familiar with this: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And then more recently, she began to co-author things with co-author works with David Kessler, and David Kessler's actually added a sixth step called Finding Meaning, and that's actually the name of one of his works. And these groundbreaking works essentially set a standard for conceptualizing the grief process. And I'm afraid that they're sometimes misunderstood as meaning that these are clearly defined steps that everyone's going to go through, and they will go through them in this order.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're finished with this stage, then you move on to the next, and so on. And that's just really not the case in my experience. Our experience of grief is very unique to who we are. And as people share their grief experiences, and as we reflect on our own experiences, we may notice some common themes, like denial or like anger and so on. But it's going to be a varied experience and a particular experience based on lots of things, like the relationship that we had with the person, or what kind of previous experience have we had with grief? What was the circumstances surrounding the situation where the person died? There are just any number of things that make the grief experience particular to us. For instance, not all who have lost parents experience grief in the same way, because the relationship with those parents might be different. Not all people who've lost children will experience it the same way. So there's so many particulars about the dynamics of the relationships that help form this unique experience when we are experiencing loss. And we will all likely experience loss and grief multiple times throughout our lives. And each time will be unique in particular. It'll have its own unique signature in our life. Brene Brown, in her book, Atlas of the Heart, has a wonderful section on grief, which includes this quote from author Elizabeth Gilbert. Elizabeth Gilbert, as you know, wrote Eat, Pray, Love, and Big Magic.
Mm-hmm.
And the quote goes, "Grief does not obey your plans or your wishes. Grief will do whatever it wants to you, whenever it wants to. In that regard, grief has a lot in common with love."
Wow, well said. Well, I'm a huge Brene Brown fan, so thank you for that reference. I'm going to look it up, and I think that on that same, thought process, what can sometimes surprise us about grief?
Great question. What we are feeling can sometimes surprise us. Why we are feeling it can certainly sometimes surprise us. When we're developing our self-awareness and mindfulness, and that's when we develop the ability to kind of reflect, well, first of all, realize what it is that we're feeling, and sometimes even put a name to it. That mindfulness helps us to, the focus isn't on the why we're feeling it, it's just what are we feeling. So when you're experiencing grief and you're just feeling really tired, and then you finally realize, I'm feeling really tired, and you just sit with that for a moment and you reflect on it and realize that you're feeling tired. Then explore it, be curious about it, don't judge it, or try not to judge it, I should say. And when we spend time noticing what we're feeling, we can then begin to be curious about why we're feeling that way. And you might be tired because you are really busy with a lot of just the practical aspects of dealing with your grief. For some people, there's like a checklist of things that you have to do when someone that you're responsible for passes away, or someone that you're taking care of. And so there's almost a delay of some forms of grief because you have to attend to the business of it. But then afterward, you're just exhausted and you're wondering, why am I exhausted? Well, be curious about it. Don't judge it. Just think about it. And I feel that the more time you spend with that, you might find out why you're feeling that way. Same thing goes for sadness or anger, anxiety. You might be really happy, and that the happiness might surprise you, or the being energized and really motivated to do something might surprise you. And basically every emotion that you can have as a person, you probably will have. And sometimes the emotion can surprise you. Don't judge it. I just want to encourage you to explore that, be curious about it, and realize that that is what it means to have a normal experience with grief, is to feel lots of different things.
Well, you just, you mentioned, how do you know you're feeling grief? How do you know what you're feeling is grief? You just said there's lots of different emotions, but
Oh, sure.
you find people sometimes say to you, I'm not sure I'm grieving right now. I know I should be grieving, but I'm not sure I am.
Well, my question to that would be, why do you think you're not grieving? And it's usually because we're judging the emotion we're having as not being appropriate for grief, because grief means being sad. Well, yeah, it can be. It can also mean being angry. It can also mean having a hard time feeling anything, just being numb. Try not to judge that in yourself, and just realize that if you are reflecting at all, if you're asking the question, am I grieving, or should I be grieving, or why am I not grieving, then you're grieving. You just have to accept the different emotions, feelings, and thoughts that you're having as being part of that process. And as I've mentioned, grief is a unique experience in so many ways. And the measures of grief are likewise particular to the person and the circumstances. There's no, if you're feeling this, then you're grieving kind of cheat sheet somewhere. And there's actually debate among mental health professionals about timelines associated with grief experiences. For instance, how long is too long? When should we expect for things to return back to normal? And when we set up timeline parameters for our grief, which is a normal process for some people, because there are some people who their go-to is being a checklist kind of person, and they feel like, they want to be very organized, and this is what I should be feeling, and so on. If that brings you comfort, if that gives you structure to your life, more power to you. Because it's essentially another attempt to try to understand and connect with the experience that you're having and the things that you're feeling. So that's perfectly normal. If we really make it very strict as to the timeline we have to follow for certain aspects of grief, or if we impose that timeline on someone else, that usually just makes things more complicated. There are lots of healthy goals that we can set if we're concerned about, am I grieving too long, or what should I do about this? And the healthy goals consistent with a healthy lifestyle are the same healthy goals that are consistent at any time of your life. So that talks about, physical well-being, mental well-being, emotional well-being, spiritual well-being, if you're a person who practices spirituality. And just creating or returning back to a healthy lifestyle does not mean that your grief is over. It just means you're processing it in this particular phase right now. And if you or those you feel that you trust, if they feel that you're exhibiting unhealthy traits, and again, these are people that you would trust, mm-hmm. or if you feel like you're having you're living unhealthy lifestyle traits in association with grief, or you're having unhealthy thoughts, then it's very likely that you need to tap into the resources that you have to get some help, and that includes professional help possibly. So I want to encourage people to do that, and at the same time not judge themselves as being weak or weird or odd for feeling that, because we all experience grief in a variety of different ways. It just gets a little more tricky when you try to, connect it to a firm timeline.
Yeah, yes, that makes so much sense. There's a viewer question, so I want to make sure we get to that. Hmm. What is the hardest stage of grief?
The reason that I'm pausing is I can't answer that question really. there are different stages of grief. There, when you feel grief very acutely, when it's like a very sudden shock,
Yeah.
that can be very hard. But I wouldn't necessarily say that's always necessarily the hardest stage, because some people who have, complicated grief that lasts a really long time. And I'm sorry I'm being vague about this, but again, grief is such a particular and unique experience that I can't judge which part of grief is going to be hard for anyone else.
And that's consistent with what we've been talking about in this conversation. So I think this viewer is looking for a concrete answer to a very something that's not concrete and is very individual. One thing I think about, I've recently lost some incredibly dear people, dear friends, and you want to. What advice would you give people, families and friends, when they ask someone who's just lost someone who's dear to them? How can I help? I have a dear friend who recently lost a dear her husband and dear friend, and it's like, what do you say? How do you,
That's a great question.
What are your thoughts on that? Because you want to help, right?
Of course.
You love this person.
Of course, and that's amazing. That's amazing. I love to hear that, because I feel that people are often so afraid of saying the wrong thing that they sometimes shy away from those who are experiencing grief, when somewhere in their heart they're still feeling this pull to, I should be doing something. And then they go and they spend time with that person and they feel awkward or anxious in those circumstances. And what should you say to someone who is experiencing, or I'm sorry, what should you say to someone who wants to help and comes to you and says, I'm really sorry that this happened. I would do anything for you. What can I do to help? Just say, thank you for being here. Thank you for being here.
You're saying to the person who lost someone, say, thank you for being there.
Well, no, I mean, if you're the friend or the family member who is coming to the person who's grieving, and they say, what can I do to help? Then the person who's grieving, would say, just say, thank you for being here. And if you are the person who is offering your help, then sometimes you don't say anything. You just come and you be there. People don't know what to do. If you're there as a family or a friend, then you've experienced a loss as well. So you're going to be feeling and experiencing grief too. And sometimes people say a lot of things trying to help. And sometimes they say things that comfort us and sometimes they don't. But Maya Angelou's famous quote is, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So when people come to you and you're experiencing grief and they ask, what can I do to help? Just be with me.
Yeah. And I think, yes, that's a lovely quote. And
actually, Michael Lewis, some of you may know him. He's a best-selling author. He wrote Moneyball and The Big Short, and his books were turned into movies. He tragically lost his young daughter a few years ago in a car crash. And he says that, people, of course, tried to connect with him, and other people who'd lost children tried to connect with him. And again, he was experiencing grief as something very particular to him. And he said that the most emotional moments came when people just showed up and showed their love by their presence. And that for him, it was the love of community and the love of friends, because people want love, even if they don't realize it. It was that helped him more than anything that anybody said.
Lovely. And that I can appreciate that so much. There's a viewer question.
Okay.
Any thoughts on the benefits of prolonged grief disorder being a new diagnosis recognized by medical professionals? I wasn't aware of that.
Great question. Yeah, that is in my understanding. It's in the most recent version of the DSM.
What's the
It's
DSM for viewers?
that's the diagnostic book that categorizes all forms of mental health diagnoses for mental health professionals. I'm not a counselor or a medical or a clinical therapist or anything, so I know that it's in there, but I certainly wouldn't be offering any diagnoses of it. And well, first of all, I also know that it's not recognized as a helpful diagnosis by all mental health professionals. In fact, that's what I was kind of referring to when I was talking about the timelines, because someone says that it's not healthy to experience grief beyond a year, or that it's not healthy to, in some circumstances, it's not healthy to experience grief beyond 6 months in other circumstances, and so on. And those are arbitrary timelines in many regards, I think. So when we, again, see our grief as something that's particular and unique to us, we should work with professionals that can help us to live healthy lifestyles with our grief, but doing things like putting labels on it is not always helpful, in my opinion.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer, and that's the first I'd ever heard of that diagnosis. So that's interesting. What are some things that happen? What are some of the things that you might talk about with someone during grief counseling? When you think about grief counseling, what might that look like?
When I am working with someone or trying to offer assistance in a situation that involves grief and loss, I try to be present for the person, physically present when I can be, and always try to be mindfully present as well and be mindful. Because again, I think a lot of people just want to feel that they're not alone, and they want to feel connection with someone. So when I'm offering assistance, I listen. I may ask a question or two, but basically I just want them to know that I'm there with them and I'm willing to listen with them and listen to them. And if they don't want to talk, to just be with them and let them know realistically that they're not alone, and that they have a resource available if they want.
Yeah, I'm sure that is important. And we've talked about this already, but I have a dear friend that said, I don't know if what I'm feeling is normal. I remember she described that she was kind of in a fog. And she said, I don't know if this is normal. I don't know.
Of course it is.
And that's the answer.
If you're feeling it, it's normal.
It's normal. Thank you for saying that. I wanted everyone to hear that. I mean, we've said it kind of different ways today this morning, but it's people will feel all sorts of different things. I remember when my father passed away, I was very, very close to my father, and it was very sudden. And I didn't cry for weeks. I couldn't. And I'm like thinking to myself, I don't know that this is normal. I think I don't understand why I'm doing this. And this doesn't feel normal. For me, there was just this processing I had to do before I could let go. Mm-hmm. But that's just, that's the discovery you do yourself. And it is truly an individual journey.
It is. And the greatest thing we can do is be curious about it and not judge it.
Yeah.
To just be mindful with it and experience it and let it be. And realize that, again, it's a unique and particular experience for us that will impact us for sure. And again, if there are healthy things we can do for our lives and we can set goals for ourselves. That's all great. Just remember that if you're feeling it, it's normal for you.
Thank you for saying that. Well said. We're really coming up against the end of the program, but just the last important program is, can you, or question rather, is what kind of resources are available to help?
Well, for persons who are experiencing grief, again, there are probably already people and resources in your own network of people, and that's always a great place to start. If you have established relationships with a therapist, or you work with people in the course of circumstances, you work with people in a medical setting, there are social workers and chaplains that you can reach out to. Just my first piece of advice would always be turn to the community in your life that you can trust. There are also clinical counseling resources, national and local support groups, and just try resources out. Of course, there are tons of books and articles. Try things out. If you don't find them to be helpful, don't give up. Just keep looking, because there is something out there that will at least help you receive some level of comfort and assistance.
Oh, thank you so much. Jeremy, thank you for being on our program and for all the important work you do. I'm sure you are an incredible source of comfort to so many people. So thank you so much.
Thank you. My honor.